Hey YouTube, today I'll be reading Prisoner B-3087. I'll be reading chapter 23. Sachsenhausen concentration camp, 1945. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my camera to focus. And chapter 23 begins on page 186. Chapter 23. 3 days later, I staggered through the gates of Sachsenhausen. I barely knew where I was or who I was. All I remembered of the last 3 days was an enormous radio tower in the distance, growing larger and larger as we marched. "That's Berlin," someone had said. "That tower is in Berlin." The tower was in Berlin, but we weren't. We were in Sachsenhausen, and I was so tired and hungry that I didn't care if I lived or died. Death seemed like such a welcome release. If the Nazis had put us right to work, I might have died that day. I might have curled up on the ground like a muscle man and never gotten up again. But they sent us to our barracks instead, where they fed us soup and bread. I was starving. I had been without food for days now, with only snow to eat each morning, before we began to walk again. But all I wanted to do was sleep. When would they let us lie down? They wouldn't let us get into our bunks yet, so I sipped at the soup. It was nothing better than flavored water, but it was warm. So blessedly warm. My dry mouth tried to hang on to every last drop as I swallowed it down. The bread I couldn't eat, not yet. I didn't put it in the waist of my pants this time, though. I clung to it like a precious jewel. Like it was a precious jewel, hoarding it like a dragon. At last, they told us it was time to sleep, and I crawled up into a single bed with 5 other men. There were so many of us we couldn't sleep on our backs, and I fell asleep right away just the same. Just being out of the cold felt like paradise. It seemed like I had just closed my eyes when morning came, and the Capos roused us up out of our beds in the light of day. We could see the camp was filled with corpses. Sometimes they lay alone up against the wall of a barrack as though they had simply fallen asleep there. Sometimes there were piles of them built neatly in rows of 4. Well, one level turned this way, the next level turned that way, so they would stack evenly. Sometimes the bodies looked like they had just been tossed aside where they had lied. In the middle of a path out behind the latrine, I had seen death many times by now. I had seen men killed. I had watched men die of starvation and cold right in front of me. But here in Sachsenhausen, death was so common, so ordinary, that the death were like fallen trees in the forest, so unremarkable that they were only moved when they got in the way. Before roll call, we could wash. The Nazis told us, and they marched us out to some pumps. There were no brushes, no soap, no towels, but I rinsed myself off anyway. The water was freezing, but I was filthy from the march. As I ran a wet finger across my teeth, a memory suddenly came to me, unbidden. I remember the first day my mother had brought me home a toothbrush. I must have been no more than 3 or 4. The toothbrush was shiny and plastic and green. That moment seemed like a million years ago. Had I ever really owned something so amazing as a toothbrush? Had I ever really lived in a world with such wondrous things in it? Even the simplest possessions seemed like treasures now. On the way to roll call, I ate what I could of last night's bread. I had clutched it throughout the night, and woke to find myself still protecting it. The soup and sleep and bread had done me good. I was no prize now, all bones and skin and shaking hands, but I wasn't so far gone that I couldn't work. The Nazis lined us up for roll call near the front gate, which had the words, "Work makes you free" on it, just like Auschwitz. Our new masters didn't seem interested in making us work, though, not right away. Instead, we stood at attention, our feet sinking into the freezing mud while they called our numbers. Again and again they went through the roll call. Sleep began to fall, and the Nazis left us standing in the yard while they went inside to warm themselves by the fire. They watched us from the window, making sure none of us moved. We stood there for hours, for no reason other than the delight of our captors. One man wiped the wet sleep from my face. Nazis saw him. They rushed outside and beat him. then ordered him to give what they called the Sachsenhausen salute. They forced him to squat with his hands held in front of him. If he moved in any way, if his arms lowered or his legs moved, or he felt over on his side, the Nazis would kill him, and they would never let him up. Either it was torture, it was torture. Everyone could see that. Our legs were barely strong enough to hold us up, let alone to squat for hours. Even a healthy person would fall over in time. The man's legs began to shake and his arms started to quiver, but still he held the salute. It was only later, when the Nazis had resumed the roll call we had all forgotten about him, that the man finally fell over. The Nazis ran to beat him, but he never felt it. He was unconscious, maybe even dead. I didn't know. The guards dragged him away. I never saw him again. Suddenly, one of the prisoners near the end of the line broke off and ran. The Nazis saw him right away and yelled for the guards at the gate to catch him. But he wasn't headed for a gate. In a stumbling, broken run, the prisoner threw himself on the high-voltage electric barbed wire that lined the fence. His body sparked and thrashed in the wires, bled as the barbs cut him. Within seconds, his body hung dead and limp. The Nazis had to turn off the electric fence to get him out. His shirt and pants were scorched from electricity, and his skin was black where the wires had touched him. I couldn't look, but at the same time, I couldn't look away. The Germans laughed as they threw his body down in front of us for everyone to see. Would any other Jews like to throw themselves on the fence, they asked. Go now. We won't stop you. We'll be glad to be rid of you. No one else took them up on their offer. After roll call, we were finally put to work. I broke rocks again in the quarry pit. Why the Germans needed so much gravel, I never understood. But I broke big rocks into medium-sized rocks, and medium-sized rocks into small rocks, and small rocks into gravel for them. Pound, 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 my hammer, getting heavier and heavier with each strike. At lunch, a half a dozen other men and I were pulled away from our scant meals of watery soup and hard bread. We looked at one another nervously. Was this it? Were we all going to be lined up along a trench and shot? I fought down waves of terror as I walked. Had I survived the death march and gotten my strength back, such as it was, I could die in a muddy ditch. I didn't want to die, not after surviving so long, not after coming this far. I scanned the camps as we walked, watching for where they were taking us. If it was a death pit, what would I do? Run? Turn and fight? Yell and scream? Or would I let them shoot me without fighting back so that no one else would have to suffer because of me? But it wasn't a ditch the Nazis took us to. It was the soldiers' mess hall. I was even more confused. Were they going to feed us in the soldiers' canteen? No, it was a trick, of course, all part of the Nazis' game, and in Sachsenhausen, they played the game with relish. The other boys and I were lined up in front of these soldiers' tables, and we were told to sing. For an hour, we were their choir, our weak, raspy voices serenading them as they laughed and talked and ate and the food they ate. Big keeping plates of meat and potatoes and gravy and steaming black coffee. I tried to look away so my stomach wouldn't rumble, but just the smell of it made my mouth water. They weren't going to feed us any of it, of course. When they were finished eating, we were sent back to our barracks, where we found no food left for us. That afternoon, they put me to work chopping firewood to heat the soldiers' quarters. Chop, 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 chop. Every swing meant survival, I told myself. Work to live. Live until the Allies come. There were planes overhead here, too, and the rumbles of explosions in the distance. Berlin was under attack. The war had come to Germany. But would the war end before the Nazis killed me? That night at roll call, the Sachsenhausen guards wanted entertainment, so they had a boxing tournament. They had some of the prisoners beat the boxers and forced the rest of us to watch. If you want to hear chapter 24, look for my next video.